Hello there, welcome to the official Philosophy of Cognitive Science podcast. My name is Alex.
And my name is still Magnus.
In this episode, we're going to be moving on and we will talk about two more notable philosophers of science. They're called Massimi and Giere. They are contemporary philosophers of science. That means they're more recent than Popper, Kuhn and Lakatos. In fact, Massimi is still alive.
I like the recap in the last episode, Alex. I think it really helped me situate myself.
Yeah, sure. It's funny you use the word situate though, as we will be talking about situated science today. That's quite a coincidence, I think.
Oh, okay. So let me start with the recap. In the last episode, we discussed Kuhn's and Lakatos's theories. They proposed their theories after Popper, and they actually agreed with Popper in that falsification is a valid form of demarcating science. However, as we know, Popper's theory is prescriptive, meaning that it theoretically explains how science should work.
Yeah, so Kuhn and Lakatos proposed descriptive theories. Kuhn proposed that science does not progress linearly, but rather it follows a cycle with scientific revolutions and abrupt paradigm shifts.
Yes, Kuhn based his theory on paradigms, a scientific view that includes many things like methods, theories, etc. He said that changes in paradigms are partly irrational.
Yeah, and then we also talked about Lakatos. He proposed research programs as the basis of his theory. But remember one thing, research programs are not as broad as Kuhn's paradigms.
Yes, Lakatos emphasized that there are progressive and degenerative research programs. So he said that science progresses when progressive research programs replace the degenerative ones. He also said that research programs consist of a hardcore and a protective belt, i.e., there are some fundamental statements to the theory which are protected by other less central statements, and scientists always try to protect their theories.
Okay, I think that's about it.
So now you're completely caught up to speed.
Great, let's get going.
Okay, Alex, in this episode, I want to have a bit of structure. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, we might be studying the arts faculty, but I'm not afraid of a little bit of structure, you know.
Nice, Alex. So there are 4 things I want you to take away from this episode. The first is to understand this notion of perspectival realism that have been proposed by Giere and Massimi. The second is to understand the relations among the thinkers we have dealt with. Here I'm thinking of the logical positivists and Popper, Kuhn, and Lakatos. And then the 2 new ones, Giere and Massimi. The third is to understand the implications of these ideas of truth or scientific truth to avoid what we might call naive realism and an extreme relativism. And lastly, you will understand the implications of these ideas for our practice as cognitive scientists. Doesn't that sound cool?
Oh yeah, but it's quite a lot, I think.
Well, fear not, my friend. It's actually not that hard. Okay, first things first. Perspectival realism is this view that borrows from objectivist realism and constructivism. Objectivist realism holds that reality exists independently of our beliefs or perceptions, and that what is true is that which corresponds to that objective reality. Now, constructivism generally holds that knowledge is actively constructed by individuals rather than passively received, and that understanding is shaped by social, cultural, and personal contexts.
Okay, so that makes sense. So there's like these 2 camps, objectivist realism and constructivism, and they're in opposition.
Yeah, but Giere and Massimi boldly attempted to take elements from both views, and that is where perspectival realism comes from. To start somewhere simple, Giere says, and I quote him now, "Everyone starts out a common sense realist. Things are thought to be just what they seem to be. For most people, most of the time, common sense realism works just fine." End of quote.
Yeah, so like children will just assume that when they look at a bottle, there really is a bottle out there, independent of them, and that they don't participate in the construction of the bottle.
Yeah, and then as we grow up, we might become what we call an objectivist realist. And here I'm going to include another of Giere's quotes. Quote, "The realism of scientists may be thought of as a more sophisticated version of common sense realism." End of quote.
Okay, so if the examiner asks me about objectivist realism, then what should I say?
So that's a good question. You can tell the examiner 3 things. The first is there exists a mind-independent world out there, which scientists investigate. 2. Scientific claims about the world can be true or false. And 3. The best scientific theories are approximately true, i.e., they tell an approximately true story about what the world is really like.
Okay, so when an objectivist realist says that the Andromeda galaxy is real, they actually mean it. They don't just mean some theory, they mean the exact galaxy is real and it would keep existing even if all humans on Earth died. And claims about the Andromeda galaxy could be either true or false.
Yeah, and it's important to notice that it can be quite hard to discredit objectivist realism or scientific realism. The reason being that science has a good track record of predicting what's going to happen.
So, objectivist realists claim that it would be a miracle if we just happened to get a lot of equations and theories right.
Spot on.
What about constructivism, the other view that Giere and Massimi borrow from?
Well, actually, Kant was a precursor to constructivism. Can you remember him, Alex?
I can't.
Exactly. He argues that we never experience the thing as it is. Imagine wearing glasses with a built-in color filter. Then everything you see is tinted. But since you've always worn them, you assume the world just is that color. Kant says our mind is like this filter. We don't see things raw. We see them through categories like space, time, and causality.
Okay, so we're all walking through life with sunglasses on, in some sense. And we never get to take them off because our sensations are shaped by our senses. So Kant argues that we can never actually see the world for what it is outside of our own mind.
Yes, and Kuhn probably borrowed a lot from Kant. Remember, Kuhn suggested that scientific paradigms shape not just what we think, but what we perceive. So when a paradigm shifts, the world experienced by scientists also changes. Our knowledge of reality is constructed within conceptual frameworks, not simply discovered in a neutral, theory-free way.
It makes sense. I really want to get to perspectival realism, Magnus.
Okay, so perspectival realism is an alternative to both objectivist realism and constructivism. Perspectival realism admits that constructivists raise some reasonable concerns and admits that science is the best game we have in town. So here's another direct quote from Giere. I think there is a valid point to the constructivist critique of science. The challenge is to do justice to this point while avoiding the excesses.
Okay.
End of quote.
Yeah. Okay, so they see that both these views have some merit and can be married.
Yeah.
This might be a dumb question, but what is perspective exactly?
So you're looking at this microphone right now, Alex.
Yeah.
You see it from the front and I see it from the back. So we have different perspectives. Now, I could go over and sit where you sit, and if I did, I would have your perspective. So perspectives are intersubjective.
Yeah, okay, so each perspective is like a window that opens up on reality. So if I look through this window, I'll see reality in this way, but if I moved to another window, I would see reality differently.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy.
So is it the same as Kuhn's notion of paradigms?
No, remember, Kuhn's paradigms are broader than perspective, as it includes the beliefs and values of the community.
Okay.
I want to discuss 4 things that perspectival realism claims. Remember, I talked about I want to keep a bit of structure in this episode. So, perspectival realism claims that human observations are perspectival. It claims that instrumental observations are perspectival. It claims that scientific models are perspectival. And lastly, it claims that scientific knowledge is perspectival. And I want to go through all of these, and we will do it slowly. So, let's start out by explaining the first claim of perspectival realism, that human observations are perspectival. Imagine you are looking at a ripe tomato.
Okay, yeah.
You say it's red, and I agree, but now imagine someone with red-green color blindness looks at the same tomato, they might describe the color differently. They might say it's brown or some shade of gray.
Ah, shades of grey. Yeah, I like where this is going.
Anyway, we might ask who's right about the color of the tomato. That's the perspectival part. Each person is perceiving the same object, but from a different sensory perspective. So color isn't a property floating out there in the world, independent of observers. It's a relational property. It depends on the interaction between the object and the perceiver.
So, the colour isn't in the tomato.
Well, no, not in an absolute sense. It's how the tomato reflects light, plus how your eyes and brain interpret that. The colors are not in the world independent of the perceiver, and colors are not in the perceiver's mind independent of the world.
So when I see the bloody tomato, what is the colour then?
Well, the color of the tomato exists in the interaction between the world and the workings of your visual system.
Okay, interesting. But what about two things that are different but look the same?
Ah, yes, we call that metamerism. Remember those optical illusions where you stare at a gray bar within a gray background? The background color scales from dark gray to light gray and contrasted with the bar, which is just one shade of gray. That sort of makes it appear as if the bar has many shades of gray.
Okay, so, but how many, like 50?
Sure, buddy.
So, when the bar is seen without that scaling grey background, it will appear as just one shade of grey.
Exactly. So, if we were to turn this into a logical argument, with premises and a conclusion, what would that look like, Alex?
Okay, well, I think it would go kind of like this. So, premise one is that each perceptual system is sensitive to a particular kind of stimulation. The second premise is that human observations depend on the stimulation and on the workings of the perceptual cognitive systems. Or said another way, the mind contributes to human observation. And the conclusion would be that human observations are perspectival.
Yes, that's correct. I think you got the first claim down. The second claim is that instrumental observations are perspectival. You know how scientists tend to use instruments to observe the world, right? They do this to sort of expand our perceptual systems. We can't see all the stars with the naked eye, so we use telescopes. When you look at Saturn through a telescope, you're not seeing Saturn as it is. You're seeing how light traveling across space gets focused through a lens system that was designed by humans. And even after that, we might enhance the pictures with some software.
Yeah, and so what?
Well, each instrument is sensitive to a particular kind of input. For example, the workings of the telescope determine the output of the telescope. Therefore, the observation is always shaped by the nature of the instrument and its interaction with the system being measured. That's why we say instrumental observations are perspectival. They're not neutral windows into the world.
What about cognitive scientists?
Well, they also use instruments and technologies like EEG, fMRI, and MEG. So, according to perspectival realism, even the instruments of cognitive scientists are perspectival.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Alex. The next thing that perspectival realism claims is that scientific models or representations are perspectival.
Okay, you need to explain that one for me, please.
Of course, Alex. Here, a model is a very expansive term. It includes theories, hypotheses, laws, principles, equations, diagrams, graphs, photographs, computer-generated images, and so on.
Okay.
The first thing to notice is that models are used to represent some aspect of the world for specific goals. For example, imagine you are a scientist researching climate change. You travel to Kenya to discover the scope of climate change. When you go home to Aarhus University, you want to represent the scenes you saw in Kenya. You could show them the photographs you took. You could make graphs about the number of continuous days without rain or how far people have to walk for food. You could make a theory about the future of Kenyan people, etc. You have to select how you want to represent this. And the crucial point is that whichever model you choose, it will be partial. The model will include some features and leave other features out.
Makes sense. And I'm guessing they're not perfectly accurate either.
Right, models have limited accuracy. Even the best weather models can't predict rain perfectly.
So they're useful, but not perfect mirrors of reality.
Exactly. And that's why we say representations or models are perspectival. They give us a view of reality shaped by purpose, simplification, and context, not a complete or objective view from nowhere. Now, the last claim from perspectival realism is that scientific knowledge is perspectival. The chapter you read by Michela Massimi on this issue, titled Perspectivism, covers this ground very clearly, and so we will draw a lot from her.
Oh, Massimi is a woman. I think she's the very first woman we've mentioned in this podcast. It's always nice to see some women making an influence in science.
Oh, I didn't know you had a feminist in you, Alex.
Of course I have, Magnus. Anyway, please continue.
Yes, the reason scientific knowledge is perspectival is because it is situated.
Situated. Can you explain that? And by the way, I thought this podcast was about making philosophy easier to grasp. And now you come here and introduce a new phrase like situated.
Well, I'm afraid this is a term we